So, hi everybody, this is Bernd.Welter from PTV speaking, and I just give you a little introduction into our xLoad server. In the next minutes, I created some slides, and before I start with the slides, let me just introduce myself. I work for PTV for about 20 years now, 17 to be more exactly, and I'm dealing with our customers, partners, subsidiaries in the topic of our developer components. So whenever they need know-how transfer and I can provide information, I try to find the proper container, whether it's a webinar like we do it right now, or a recorded movie, or a forums posting. I am a potential candidate to provide that kind of information to you. So today it's about loading space optimization. Let me just introduce you into the major terms of loading space optimization in the philosophy of PTV's xLoad server. It starts with you have a big, large container where you have some properties like the length, the width, the height of the container. Then the volume, absolute volume of this container, the payload. And the second object category, the object model is quite simple. The second object category is just the items you want to load into these containers or bins. I use some synonyms like loading pieces for the items. You can define various categories, so you can specify how many of these objects of a specific category have to be put into the bins. You can specify their physical dimensions, length, width, height, volume, and weight, of course. And on top of this, you can specify how you can deal with these items, whether you can tilt them, yes or no, whether you can stack them, put something on top of them, for example. It makes a big difference if you're loading flat screen television and fridges, for example. These are objects you cannot tilt. So that's the objects you have, the object model, and then you have to determine, based on these data, the minimized loading meters, for example, or the other use case is to find the optimal horizontal packet assembling. So how to put these objects into the containers. Yeah, that's it. Quite simple. I just want to show you some examples we've prepared. I start with an introduction into our code sample interface. This is a live a page that is available live. I will give you the URL later on. And here we have our sample environment for xServer 2, including some samples for loading optimization. Here we go. And in this sample, I can just load text files, for example, my scenario number 1 with the simple items. Let's have a look at how this file looks like. So later on, if you're interested, you can also add or load your own files. It's quite simple. You just have to provide a CSV file that specifies the containers or items. Here it starts with 15 different categories of items where we specify not all the properties that are available, but almost any of them. And now let's load that example. Here we go. Then we load the bins as well. Here we are. And once we have defined a scenario, the xLoadServer tells me how to put these objects into the container, into the bins. So here we are. This is the definition of the bins. Of course, you can also fill the example with by clicking, but it's easier. Usually, it's easier to use a CSV file. So let's have a look at the results. Here we see some aggregated values, some KPIs of the result, showing us that about 40%, for example, of the volume is filled, and we see the 6 different items that are packed into the large bin. That's it. That was example number 1. Let's have once again a look at the slides. So there were different categories of bins. I had just one individual piece per category, and I was able to stack and tilt. However, it was not really necessary in that example. If we look at it once again, we can just see just a very small scenario. So let's go on with example number 2. Let me load example number 2. 2A to be more precise. So we have several items and I'm not allowed to tilt them. Once again, let me open them in the editor so you can have a look at this. Here we go, and in the last column we see there's always a 0, so we are not allowed to tilt these objects. Reload the bin. That's it. So several items of that category, several categories, and example number 2, here is it, where is it? So come on, we are different categories, several objects per category, and I'm not really allowed to tilt or shift them. So let's go on with the next one, sample number 2B. Now I am allowed to tilt these objects. Come on, here we are. Example number 2B. So here we are. Once again, we see the results. Let me just move on to the next example, which is sample 3A. We have individual categories. I label them as fridges, washing machines, and so on. And we have just one object per category. And once again, I'm allowed to tilt those objects. 3A. Oops, there are the pins. Which is not really a challenge, of course. I mean, I have just one piece of these things, and it's quite easy to put them into the global container, into the global bins. And so I just move on with the last scenario. I have scenario number 3 beta. It's loaded. In the meantime, we can have a look at the definition of that slide. So we have several objects of that categories, several fridges, several washing machines. And I am allowed to stack those objects, but I'm not allowed to tilt them because fridges, washing machines, and so on. All these examples, none of them can be tilted, of course. There we are, and then we see that's our solution. We managed to do all these objects, to pack them all into one single container. That's it. That's what I wanted to show you. And that's, as I said, the interface of the xLoad is not that complicated. You have just 2 major object categories. You have the physical dimensions. You have the, well, behavior, what you're allowed to do with these objects, tilt them, stack them. And, well, you have 1 out of 2 goals, which is the loading meters or the manage to stack them all into the containers. That's it. And then finally, you get the information how to put the load into the truck or the container. That's it. So if you have more questions about our capacities in terms of loading space optimization, just get back to me, Bernd.Welter at ptvgroup.com. Write to our support if you have technical issues with our loading space optimization. And of course, I recommend to have a look at our forum, developer forum, where you can also find examples or screenshots quite often of almost all the interfaces we support. And then there's also the developer blog. And as I mentioned, here is the URL to the test environment, so you can create and upload your own CSV files into the loading space example and evaluate the quality of that. That's it. Thank you very much for your patience, and well, see you soon somewhere in Europe.